We now know the New York Jets schedule for the upcoming season. And based on the way things played out, the first 7 weeks may decide whether 2025 is a success or a failure. We're talking the 2025 Jets schedule today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Thursday, May 15th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today, we are going to break down the Jets' 2025 schedule. It was officially announced last night on NFL Network, although the full schedule actually leaked a few hours before the NFL Network 3-hour extravaganza. I think there are some real positives to this schedule, the way things played out for the New York Jets. We're going to talk about that. We'll also talk about the marquee matchup, the games you're going to circle on your calendar. But we're going to begin by talking about what I think is the biggest takeaway. I think that the way the schedule has set up for the New York Jets gives them a real opportunity in the first 7 weeks. And I think it makes these first 7 weeks of the season really critical. And the reason I say that is if you look, first of all, on paper, these first 7 weeks aren't that daunting. I always preach caution when the schedule comes out about drawing sweeping conclusions because for the most part, we don't know who the tough opponents are going to be, and we don't know who the easy opponents are going to be. I mean, yeah, okay, I think we know like Buffalo, Kansas City, Baltimore are going to be really good teams in the AFC. I think we know Cleveland's probably not going to be so good. But for the most part, it's difficult to say from year to year. Sometimes a team has a hot year out of nowhere. Sometimes a team disappoints out of nowhere. So you always want to exercise caution when you're doing this type of analysis. But I think if you look at the way the first 7 games shook out, the Jets begin with a home game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Then Buffalo comes to town. That's a tough one. Week 3, the Jets go to Tampa. Week 4, they go to Miami. Week 5, they host Dallas. Week 6 is in London against Denver. Week 7, they host the Carolina Panthers. One thing that jumps off the page is that in the first 7 weeks, there are 5 home games. Now, yes, one of them is actually a London game that's not at MetLife Stadium. But what we can say is that the Jets only go on the road twice in the first 7 weeks. And the way a season shakes out for a team can be very different, and it can vary from team to team. And some of that is based on the schedule. If you get a really tough schedule in the front end, and then the back end's a little bit easier, maybe you say, and you have a veteran team that, guys who have been together before, you might say, we can weather a tough start. I think for a team like the Jets, where you have a new coach, where a lot of the key players are new, obviously a new quarterback, a couple other key players who are just joining the team. It's very much a new roster, and it's very much a new vibe. Even the guys who are back this year, I feel like they're going to feel differently about the team. This team is no longer about Aaron Rodgers. So it's very much like a new situation. If you can get some good feelings in the early part of the season, and you can build some confidence, sometimes that's the type of thing that sparks a surprise season. Now, I know the first thing people are going to say is, if you look at the first 3 weeks, home against Pittsburgh, home against Buffalo, at Tampa Bay, those are 3 teams that made the playoffs last year. So you start off with three straight playoff opponents. But I'm actually going to take the alternate take. I think that of those 3 teams, Buffalo is the only one that I think is a huge Super Bowl contender. Pittsburgh was a team that kind of limped into the playoffs last year. Tampa Bay won a soft division. I mean, the Bucs are a good team, and Todd Bowles has done a nice job with them. But the Bucs were a team that made the playoffs as much as anything because they played in the NFC South last year. So Buffalo is going to be a tough game, but you get them at home. And the early season games, sometimes fluky things happen. Sometimes you catch a team in a weird spot. There's a lot of variation, especially those first 2 weeks of the year. There's a real opportunity here for the Jets to get off to a big start. I mean, obviously Pittsburgh coming to town, and it's very possible that this could be an intriguing matchup from the standpoint that the Jets have a quarterback who was Pittsburgh's opening day starter last year, Justin Fields. Now, Fields, of course, was not the starter for most of the season, but he was the week 1 starter for Pittsburgh. And the Steelers could be sporting the Jets starting quarterback from a year ago, Aaron Rodgers. And, of course, there'd be a bit of an interesting dynamic. Rodgers returning to MetLife Stadium. I don't know that he's going to get that big of a reaction. I mean, I don't really I mean, I don't have any particular love for Aaron Rodgers based on how things went with the Jets. The trade was just a colossal failure, and his tenure here was not good. But I don't really like have a lot against him. The Jets made a lot of awful decisions over the last 2 years, but they didn't have. It was not like Rodgers forced them to do this stuff. They made these bad decisions on their own volition. Now, part of it was, of course, they were trying to placate Rodgers, but it's not like Rodgers forced them to make the trade. But there will still be a lot of storylines about the Rodgers Fields matchup week 1. Then, of course, week 2, Buffalo comes to town. Big AFC East rivalry. A lot of bad blood between these two teams over the last couple of years. Of course, the Bills have been much more successful than the Jets, but lots of trash talk have gone between the Bills and the Jets. So that's an interesting game. Then back-to-back trips to Florida, Tampa Bay week 3, Miami week 4. The Miami game's a Monday night game, one of 2 Monday night games the Jets have. Then you get Dallas at home, you get Denver in London, Carolina at home. I mean, that's not a schedule full of contenders. That's not the NFL loading up Baltimore, Cincinnati, 2 Buffalo games in the first 7 weeks. Those are 7 games where, yeah, some of the opponents are more difficult than others. Look, you're not going to get like a first 7 weeks where you play the 7 worst teams in the NFL. That's just not going to happen. But I think if you're looking from a Jet standpoint, it's navigable. I mean, it certainly doesn't look like outside of Buffalo, there's no team that I think I look at and say the Jets are going to be completely overmatched by them. There are some games that are going to be tough. I do think going down to Tampa Bay week 3 and winning against the Bucs, especially in the September heat where it's still very, very hot in Florida at that point of the year, I think that might be a tough game. But there's not really a lot of games where the Jets look completely overmatched. And again, 5 of their 9 designated home games take place in this 7-week stretch. So you get on a little bit of a roll. Maybe teams and the Jets are not expected to do big things this year. Our partners at FanDuel have the Jets with an over under of 5.5 wins. But if the Jets can get through these first 7 weeks at 4-3, and show some fighting spirit, it'll say good things about this team. It'll set this team up for potentially a run on the second half of the schedule, and it'll create good feelings in the fan base. And I think one of the good things the Jets have going for them this year is that there's not a lot expected from them. If you think about the last 2 years, you think about a lot of the years since this Jets playoff drought began, the Jets have entered with these sky-high expectations, these expectations that are just not realistic to meet. And that certainly was kicked into overdrive in the 2 Aaron Rodgers years. This year, the Jets are entering the season, and people aren't expecting anything out of them. People are kind of expecting them to be the worst team in the NFL, or if not the worst team in the NFL, something close to it. And there's a talent base here. And now there's a schedule where, if you defend your home field and you defend the home field of London, I know that game that technically counts as a home game, but again, first 7 games, I think it's a real break to only have 2 true road games. Now, of course, that does mean you're going to have a lot of road games in the back half of the schedule, but I think for a team like the Jets, I think for a team that's just starting out with a new regime, that's big. That good start, that could be essential. That could be the type of thing that propels you into a surprise season. You see it happen a lot in the NFL where teams maybe not expected to do a whole lot, but they just get off to a good start and the confidence level grows, and they don't realize they're supposed to be bad. So if we were looking for ways that this may things that were really good for the Jets, this presents a real opportunity. Now, of course, an opportunity is only as good as what you make from it. But I do think that this is a real chance for the Jets based on the early part of the season. I'm always a believer that you want it as favorable as possible in the early part of the season, try and build up some confidence, try and make your team believe. And I think the Jets got that opportunity based on what the schedule makers provided them. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, let's talk about some of the key matchups this season. I mean, so you look at the slate of quarterbacks the Jets are going to face. It could be fun. We could be seeing Josh Allen. Of course, we're going to see Josh Allen. We're going to be seeing Joe Burrow. We're going to be seeing Lamar Jackson. And of course, week 1, Aaron Rodgers might be coming to town. Let's talk about the games you want to circle on your calendar ahead here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. If you're a Knicks fan, well, last night wasn't so much fun. But hey, you're still in the driver's seat in the series. If you're not a Knicks fan, FanDuel's the best way to get in on the action for the NBA playoffs, and you can also get in on the NFL action. Jets only have an over/under of 5.5 wins. You think they're going to beat expectations? Again, FanDuel's a great place to get in on it. New to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the National Basketball Association. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. We are talking about the New York Jets 2025 schedule, which was announced yesterday. The news actually broke before the 3-hour extravaganza on NFL Network. And if you're an everydayer who's been listening to this podcast for a number of years, you've probably heard my disdain for schedule release day. And I know it's like kind of weird because I talk about the schedule. I talk about the Jets schedule when it comes out, but this is a daily podcast. It is the top story about the Jets. I don't know that we need like a 3-hour NFL Network extravaganza to break down the schedule. I don't know that we need to like slowly release the dates and times of key games in the 3 days leading up to it on national morning shows across the networks. I do think that schedule release day, though, is really important for one group of people, and that's season ticket holders, because they're pretty much setting your schedule for the fall. The number of primetime games you get, that might determine whether you need to like put in time for vacation the next day. You get to see like what dates you're going to be heading to the stadium. So that's an exciting. I do think if you're a season ticket holder, schedule release day is a very exciting day. So what are the key games for the Jets? Well, opening day is always a key game. You're always excited, especially when the Jets open at home, and they do get the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's a 1:00 game on CBS on September 7th. And, as we talked about a little bit earlier, this could be the return of Aaron Rodgers to the Meadowlands. And I'm not really sure, like I said, I'm not sure the reception Rodgers is going to get, because he certainly was not a success here, but I don't know that I don't have that many negative feelings toward him. I mean, I think he tried hard. I think the Jets made a lot of bad moves to placate him, but that's not his fault. That's the Jets' fault. That's Woody Johnson's fault. But the Rodgers Justin Fields matchup could be somewhat intriguing, also from the standpoint the Steelers wanted to keep Fields. The Steelers wanted Fields at quarterback. So that's a game obviously with big storylines. But I think there are some other key matchups to look at. I think there are other key games you want to look at. The first game that was announced, which was announced on Tuesday, was the Week 6 game when the Jets travel to London to take on the Denver Broncos. And that's not such a key game from the standpoint that Denver is necessarily a marquee opponent. It's a key game from the standpoint, it's a good excuse to go to London, which is, in my opinion, one of the great cities in the world. I've been there a couple of times. I really enjoy it. So that's a game. That's certainly a game worth watching on the calendar. And then there are the games against what I would consider the top tier AFC opposition. Week 2, the Jets host the Buffalo Bills at home at MetLife Stadium. And we know Buffalo is going to be the favorite in that game. Again, our partners at FanDuel are going to make Buffalo the favorite. There's no question about that. But we know that the Jets have actually been very competitive against the Bills in recent years at MetLife Stadium. 2022, they surprised Buffalo. It was 2 weeks after Breece Hall got injured, and that was an injury in 2022 that kind of derailed the Jets offense, because Zach Wilson was really struggling, but it didn't really matter. The Jets went on a 4-game winning streak early in that season because Breece Hall just went on a tear, and then Breece Hall got injured against Denver. Jets lost the next game to New England without Breece Hall. Zach Wilson had a terrible game, and then against Buffalo a week later, a game nobody was expecting the Jets to win. The Jets shocked the Bills. And of course, 2023, the famous game where Aaron Rodgers got injured on the first series, suffered that Achilles tear. Jets rallied from 2 scores down in the fourth quarter and won the game in overtime on an Xavier Gibson punt return. And then even last year, that was the Jeff Ulbricht's first game as Jets head coach. It was a very competitive game. A Jets team that was seeing their season go down the drain, fought Buffalo hard. They completed a Hail Mary from Aaron Rodgers to Allen Lazard at the end of the first half, but some red zone failures doomed the Jets, along with a terrible Aaron Rodgers interception that he blamed on Mike Williams. So Buffalo's coming to town, but if you look at the last 3 years at MetLife Stadium, Jets are 2-1, and they've been competitive in all 3 games. So I wouldn't be shocked to see the Jets, Sometimes weird things happen in those divisional games. So wouldn't be shocked to see the Jets give Buffalo a real fight. And then the second game against Buffalo is Week 18 in Orchard Park, which is a place the Jets have not played all that well in recent years. Jets have been blown out almost every time in recent memory at Buffalo. So Week 18, that's a tough place to end the season. But the other two matchups against teams that I would consider AFC heavyweights, one is Week 8 against the Cincinnati Bengals, which comes right before the bye. I mean, I think you'd rather the bye come before the Cincinnati game. I think you'd rather have the bye than the Cincinnati game, not Cincinnati then the bye. But, Bengals will come into town with that high-flying offense, Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase. They'll be tough to slow down. So Jets, if it's a bad game for the Jets, at least their bye comes and they can kind of lick their wounds. If they win that game, it'll be quite a way to go into your bye week. And then the other game against the team that I consider really high up in the AFC is Week 12, November 23rd. The Jets play at Baltimore. Now, I think the schedule makers did the Jets a little bit of a break with this one because that's going to be a really tough game. It's never easy to go into Baltimore, face Lamar Jackson, unique offense. It requires a very specialized game plan. The thing is, the schedule makers put the Jets one Thursday night game the week before that. The Jets play Week 11 Thursday night at New England. Week 12, they go to Baltimore. So when you play Thursday night, it's tough because you have a short week going into it. But then the week after, you kind of get like a little mini bye. You get 3 extra days to rest up and 3 extra days for the coaching staff to prepare things. So you could make a case that Thursday night game is actually very well timed for the Jets because it gives them a little bit of extra time to prepare for a very difficult trip down to Baltimore to face Lamar Jackson and company. Jets only have 2 primetime games this year. That is a real change from recent years past. Last year, the Jets were originally scheduled for 6 primetime games. They ended up playing 5 because the game against the Colts got flexed out of Sunday Night Football, and rightly so. Jets only 2 primetime games. Week 11, the aforementioned game at New England, that's Thursday Night Football. The Jets also play Week 4 at Miami on Monday Night Football. And then there is a third nationally televised game. That's the game against Denver in London. So you're going to need. I guess this means that you're probably going to need NFL Sunday Ticket this year because Jets have an awful lot of 1:00 starts. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, I like 1:00 starts. I think that's a good thing. We're going to talk about some of the best parts of the schedule. I think it's 1:00 starts. I think there are some other areas where the schedule makers did the Jets some favors. We'll talk about them continuing here on this Thursday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Thursday. We are breaking down the New York Jets 2025 schedule, which was officially announced last night, even though the full schedule leaked during the day. And that's, one of the reasons I kind of laugh at the NFL for making a big deal out of the schedule release is so many teams have their full schedule leaked before by somebody in the media before the league officially announces it. And that was the case once again with the New York Jets yesterday. It seems to happen every year that we know the full Jet schedule before the official announcement. I think there are some really positive aspects of this schedule for Jets fans and for the team in general. Now, I don't know how much this actually impacts the team itself, but I like the number of 1:00 games the Jets have. Jets were in primetime a lot the last 2 years. 2023 because everybody thought Aaron Rodgers was going to be their quarterback. Nobody could have foreseen the injury. 2024 because he was their quarterback. Jets reviewed as a hot commodity, and unfortunately, what that really did was it showed the nation just how rough of a season the Jets were having. But I'll tell you, as a podcast host, I selfishly hope for 1:00 games because I have to record a post game show after the Jets play, and it's much easier to do that at 4:30 than it is at midnight. But I just think overall, if you're a fan, football is meant to be played at 1:00 on Sunday. You want to just enjoy your Sunday, spend your Sunday morning getting ready for the game, enjoy the game at 1:00, and then 4:30 the game's over. You can get ready for your Monday. I think that's especially true if you go to games. I think the 1:00 games are much easier to go to than games later on. So I don't mind the lack of primetime games. I think the lack of primetime games is just fine. And going into that, one of the things I always want to see the Jets avoid are road games on short weeks. And the Jets only have one of them all season. That is week 11. They go to New England for that Thursday night game. One of the things I mentioned yesterday was I would have liked the Thursday night game to be at home, because Thursday night's already a compressed week. Then when you add a travel day in there, it makes it almost impossible to prepare, to practice, to get ready for that game. So that's a negative. But outside of that, there are no short weeks where the Jets have road games. The Jets, of course, do play Monday night against the Miami Dolphins week 4, but then week 5 they have a home game against the Dallas Cowboys. So at least on that short week, the Jets will be playing at MetLife Stadium in the following week. And speaking of that, one thing I always watch is where the Miami games come. And I think that you always want the Miami games to be as late in the season as possible. The reason for that is when they come early, it's still really hot in Florida. September is still like really, really hot and humid in Florida. And you want the home game late because the Dolphins are a warm weather team. You want them coming to a cold weather venue. I think things worked out reasonably well for the Jets. Now, the Jets did get the Miami road game early in the season. It is week 4, but it's a Monday night game. It's a night game, so it won't take place during the heat of the day. So the Jets, I think, do catch a little bit of break there. That even though they have to go to Miami early in the season, it's at least not going to be during the part of the day where the heat's at its worst. Because you watch like week 1, week 2 games in Miami, visiting players are always cramping up near the end of those games because, teams don't use the preseason to prepare their players to get them into game shape. So those players really end up having a tough time near the end of the first couple weeks of the season when they play in Miami during day games. But at least the Jets get a night game near the end of September. And then the second Miami game takes place December 7th. So you'll have the warm weather Dolphins coming to a cold weather venue at MetLife Stadium in December. That's what you like to see. And the Jets also get the Jacksonville Jaguars the next week. So the Jets get back-to-back Florida teams at home in December. I think that's a real positive. Another thing that I think is a good thing for the Jets is I don't see any back-to-back weeks where they face really high-level opponents. And the 4 games that I saw were 3 opponents. Buffalo, you have 2 games against them, Baltimore and Cincinnati. And if those games were stacked together, that could be a stretch that destroys your season. Back-to-back games, or even if you have 3 games in a row against those teams, that's a real danger spot. You see those types of games happen you see those types of stretches happen every year where a team just faces a buzzsaw and it ends up really, really harming the season. Jets actually kind of had one of those last year, early on in the season. Now, there were so many other aspects that threw 2024 off track that I don't know if the schedule really was the number one determining factor, but Jets lost week 4 to the Denver Broncos. And at the time I said that was a really big loss. I remember thinking when the Jets lost that game to the Broncos in week 4, they were in some big trouble because what followed was a game in London against the then undefeated Vikings, game at home against the Bills, game against the Steelers, who were a really quality team. And by that point, the Jets season was pretty much over. So you want to avoid those like buzzsaw situations. And I think that, last year Pittsburgh game scared me. This year Pittsburgh doesn't scare me so much. So it's ironic because, last year I gave you a stretch where the Jets played the Steelers and Bills back to back, and I said that was a really tough stretch. This year, the Jets start with the Steelers and Bills. And I think the Bills are going to be really tough. I'm not as worried about the Steelers though. I think the Steelers have some issues. So I don't see any real games that I don't see any real stretches here where if the Jets lose a game, then it could precipitate a 3-4 game losing streak. Of course, it's possible the Jets have one of those losing streaks along the way, but I think that the way the schedule lined up, there's no obvious real danger spot there the way there was a year ago. And again, part of that's because I'm not as big on Pittsburgh as I was a year ago. I think last year, the early part of the season, the Steelers were really tough out. I'm not sure they're going to be as good this year. So I'm not that concerned with that Pittsburgh-Buffalo start to the season. So, at the end of the day, we knew the 17 games the Jets would play. We knew the venues for the most part, except for the London game heading in. What we found out last night and yesterday during the day is not earth-shattering stuff. I mean, it's the type of thing that I think either helps you on the margins or hurts you on the margins. I think for the most part, the Jets were helped on the margins. There were some things you don't love. I mean, I don't love the trip to Tampa Bay week 3 during the day. I just talked about week 4 in Miami when the Jets play at night in Florida, how that's a good thing. Jets do have to go to Florida a week earlier during the day to play Tampa Bay in week 3. I don't love the fact they have to go to New England for Thursday night football, but I think that if you asked me heading into yesterday if I would accept this type of schedule, The answer would have been yes. I think that the good, generally speaking, outweighs the bad for the Jets. But of course, it comes down to how well the Jets execute. You can have the easiest schedule in the world. If you don't execute well, it's not going to help you. I mean, 2019, the Jets never left the Eastern time zone. Jets played all 16 of their games in 2019 in the Eastern time zone, the least travel in NFL history, and they went 7-9, and they were a bad 7-9. So really, your schedule only matters so much. It really comes down to the players executing and outperforming the opposition. And that's what we're going to focus on ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast. But that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Thursday, everybody. And send in your mailbag questions. Because of all the scheduling madness this week, we weren't able to do our mailbag on Wednesday. We're going to do our mailbag tomorrow, so please feel free to submit your questions. Answer them then.